We now present a conversation with Dr. Sundaresh, an orthopedic surgeon serving at the Sathya Sai General Hospital at Whitefield, Bengaluru. Dr. Sundaresh was the surgeon who operated on Swami after Swami had suffered a hip fracture. In conversation with Dr. Sundaresh is Professor G. Venkataraman, former Vice Chancellor of the Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning.
Sairam, Dr. Sundaresh. Are you
Sairam.
Sundaresh or Sundaresan?
Sundaresh.
Sundaresh. Sairam, Dr. Sundaresh. I am extremely delighted that you are here, and I am glad that I caught you before you left. I've seen you come many times, and you go very quickly. This time I decided I will waylay you somehow or the other and bring you here because you are in great demand by our listeners for reasons that are well known. So let me, on behalf of Radio Sai and our listeners, innumerable in 3-4 continents, welcome you to our studios.
Thank you, sir. Sairam.
Sairam. I don't want to flatter you, but the fact of the matter is, very cold, hard fact is that you are somehow or the other one of those unique persons in human history. Destiny has placed you there. But before we come to all that, I would like to know something about how you came to Swami. Obviously, you came to Swami through your family, and that was a long time ago. And life was different. Devotees' relationship with Bhagavan was different, and very few of us know much about that. So why don't you start from those days?
Actually, I have never known a time without Swami.
My God.
Therefore,
let me put it this way. How old were you when you first saw Swami?
No, as I said, I've never known a time when I was without Swami, because probably at the time when I was born, my parents were already going to Swami.
Okay.
Because they first met him in 1948 at Bangalore.
1948?
And that was in Diwan Purnaya's residence, where somebody just informed them that somebody called Sai Baba has come, and then that we should go there. So my mother was a devotee of Shirdi Baba to a certain extent, and of Dattatreya. So they both decided that they should go and visit.
That is your parents?
Yes, my mother and father. Both of them went and visited Baba there. At that point of time, I think my oldest sister, that's the first sibling, was about 2.5 years old. And they went and met and saw Swami there in the first instance.
That was before Swami had moved to the this new Mandiram. He was still in Pata Mandiram because this was inaugurated in 1950.
Yes,
birthday.
You're right. That's right.
Did your parents come to Puttaparthi at that time?
Yes, there at the residence of Diwan Purnaya. Apparently, my dad was spoken to by Swami at great length, and then he took my oldest sister in his lap and played with her. And my father was also told that they should come to Puttaparthi soon.
By the way, can I ask you a question? Did Swami ever play with you? Do you remember that?
No, not that I remember, but we've had good times with Swami.
Okay, I will come to that later. Carry on.
And thereafter, on the suggestion and practically an invitation, my parents did visit Puttaparthi. And those days, the trip to Puttaparthi was quite an arduous trip.
Expedition, literally.
Yes, it was more like almost 8 to 10 hour journey to reach the abode of Prashantinilayam, or the Pata Mandiram, old mandir that was here.
Did you make any of those trips?
Yes, I have made some of those trips, but not in those primitive conditions of going by cart across the lake of Bukkapatnam and all that. But
I see.
We have travelled
by the way,
bus.
I went to Bukkapatnam about 4 months ago, and I've taken a photograph of that cart track. It still exists because the lake was dry.
Yes, and that lake has never seen water, I think. I have never seen water.
No. 2 years ago, it was overflowing.
It
was absolutely overflowing.
So, those days were quite strenuous to come to Puttaparthi, but despite that, there was some attraction in Swami that brought people here, and the same thing brought my parents also here. And
he calls it divine attraction.
Yes, of course it is a divine attraction. So ever since we have been with Swami, and so this is 3 years before I was born, so therefore I stick to my original statement as I have never known a time without Swami, so that is a fact. So,
Okay. Now, when did you actually start feeling that Swami was divine?
well, actually, we passed a lot of our time in childhood and the youth without paying much attention to the divinity of Swami in its real sense. Though
I suppose you are so enthralled, you don't think about it.
You never thought about it. We knew he is God. We took it for granted that he is God. But we never even thought for a moment the implications of
there is a reason why I asked that question. There is a very deep reason why I asked that question. It has not been given to many to have that experience with Swami in that period. And the people who came into contact with Swami and had experience with Swami are comparable to the Gopalas of Vrindavan. I don't think they knew Krishna was God. They treated God as their friend. And it was a kind of divine intimacy that they experienced. They just couldn't bother about it, but they loved him. That's all. That is the reason why I'm asking you about that period. As you said, you took it for granted.
Yeah, it was taken for granted because we were all quite thrilled to be here. As small children, we were here for every vacation and for every festival.
Do you recall any spectacular miracles? People like to hear about those things.
The miracles that we have encountered in our own family have been quite a many. To begin with, this same older sister of mine who is right now in Canada, happily married, and she had a problem of abdominal pain and was diagnosed to be having appendicitis. And at this point of time, the surgeons and all the doctors concerned, they said it has to be operated immediately, otherwise there's a risk of a rupture of the appendix and it may cause problems, and then she'll require a major operation and threat to life and things like that. However, she decided that it shall not be operated without Swami's consent.
Which year was that roughly?
I am very unclear about the time. It probably was sometime in the late 50s.
Late 50s.
Late 50s. So, and then taking her sentiments into account, my parents also decided, that was a great thing also. Instead of overpowering her sentiments and putting her through the knife, they brought her to Puttaparthi by an early morning taxi, and then Swami saw us as soon as we came in, and we had a
You
interview.
remember all that very clearly?
Yes, I was with the thing in the interview room, and then my sister told him that this is what is happening and I don't want to get operated and all that. So he just said no, nothing is necessary, and he just touched her abdomen, and then
that was it.
There was no more pain and she was fine, and then there was no talk of appendicitis again after that.
Were you stunned by that? Or you took it for granted in your stride?
Yeah.
This is what you expected?
I think we didn't pay much attention to those things, actually. It was a very happy occasion that she didn't have to go through surgery. And Swami cured her, so we accepted it and came off. Actually, we didn't pay much attention to the aspect of how it could have been done, and
you took all that for granted, literally.
Absolutely. There are lots of things that we took for granted through the years, which I even now feel that if we had delved into the depths of it at that point of time, we would have been far better off today.
Oh, you can't say that.
I have no regrets about what we had today.
I think you are destined to have certain experiences which would have become diluted if you had started going on the path of jnana at that point of time.
Yes.
It might have even raised doubts. But at some point of time, as you grew up, you must have begun to see Swami somewhat differently. Am I right?
Yes, initially we used to experience and hear a lot of stories of Swami, almost on the same lines as what Krishna would probably have been doing. Like he was very close to the devotees, moving around with the devotees, and suddenly appearing where he was not supposed to appear, behind my mother when she was cooking and asking what she was cooking. Oh,
it happened to your mother also?
Yes, and then what is cooking? Why don't you give me some food? And
my God.
That kind of things. Those days, Prashanti Nilayam was, the new mandir was the old building that
I know.
We remember the core of the building. had a sand bed all around it with lots of trees.
Yes.
And every time we came, we just parked ourselves in front of the trees. Initially, it used to be in the veranda itself. People used to practically sleep in the veranda, the present veranda where we all are privileged to sit.
So that was your accommodation.
That was the main accommodation, and Swami used to come around at all odd times and talk to people and then take them inside and talk to them and that kind of stuff. I have no personal experience of that stage, but I am very clear about the way we used to park ourselves in front of the mandir on the sand bed underneath a tree, put all our luggage there and even cook food there and eat, because there were very few places to eat.
Yes, I heard from real old timers.
We used to bring all the provisions, a kerosene stove, and so the whole works. It used to be a great picnic, actually. We enjoyed it, honestly, though it was a little hard. We slept on a sand bed. We went to the river Chitravati for our daily ablutions, and then we had bath there. And
can't think of that. There's only sand in Chitravati, no sand and plastic.
Absolutely. Later, it was, of course, the small thatched cubicles that came up, which gave us hot water during the winter, colder seasons of the so-called Puttaparthi, and that became a big business in Puttaparthi. So,
as I asked you a little while ago, at what point of time did you begin to feel somewhat differently towards Swami? Obviously, you don't have that kind of feeling towards Swami now as you had when you came.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think a change occurred when I first went to the United States for a short while. I was in the United States for about 6 months to my brother's house, and then I had...
Which year was that?
This was in the year 1989.
Oh.
That's what I was saying. We missed a lot of good times before. And anyway, we didn't disregard Swami in any way. We didn't go away far from him. But at the same time, our outlook towards Swami and his mission changed. For example, we used to have bhajans at home at the center close to the Malleshwaram Samiti as one of the first samitis to start in the whole organization.
That was in the 60s,
based in our home.
That was in the 60s, right?
Yes, and we used to
Malleshwaram, I should mention for the benefit of listeners, is in Bangalore City.
It's in Bangalore City.
Yes,
very true.
You're a Bangalore man.
Very much a Bangalore man, even now. So the bhajans were a large crowd used to be there, and we used to be fairly regular initially. And as we grew up and other attractions took us on, we were irregular for the bhajans, but were regular for the prasadam that was following that, because my mother was always
practical,
quite generous about the prasadam that came, and even today that continues in our home. During this visit of mine to the United States along with my wife in 1989, my brother and his family, we saw them quite deeply involved in the Sai Center and its activities at Syracuse in New York State. And therefore, since they were deeply involved in it, and we were kind of dragged into it passively to attend all those activities of theirs, and then we started kind of enjoying it. That was nice. And then when we came back, I think my wife took the lead, and then she got into the Malleshwaram Samiti a little more actively and got into this Bal Vikas and all that. And
but much before that, Swami used to come to your house and things like that, right?
Yes, Swami has come to our house about maybe 4 or 5 times on various occasions. And but as I said, all these things were taken for granted. It was not really utilized the way it should have been, probably. Each time there was a public meeting in Malleshwaram, it used to be organized by my father, Dr. Chandar, who was a dental surgeon in that area in Bangalore. And Swami would come and give. It was essentially meant for Swami to give a discourse to the public. That was the main purpose of these functions. It was always held in a huge field, where a small shamiana would be put up, and for just enough for Swami and the stage and
I've seen a photograph of that.
Yes, a few of them are there still with us. And one of these functions, Swami would go for the function, and then he would come home after the function and usually have supper with us before he went back to Brindavan Whitefield. It's very interesting at one point of time to recollect that once Swami had asked my mother and father to prepare food for about 200 people. And we lived in a fairly large bungalow, which had plenty of room for guests and a huge compound and all that. But so food was prepared for about 200 people. After the function, usually Swami had a big retinue of people at that point of time also. And there wasn't the kind of security that there is now. So it was difficult to control the pouring in crowd. So it so happened that there were more than 600, 700 people inside. And Swami just said, okay, no problem, let everybody come in. And so everybody walked in. And my mother went and pleaded with Swami. I said, look, you asked us to cook for 200 and you brought 700 people with you. How do you expect me to feed all of them? And then, of course, Swami, in his own divine way, he said, okay, let me go to the kitchen. He went into the kitchen and opened all the dishes that were prepared and materialized some vibhuti and put into all of them. And then it was served to everybody, and everybody ate to the heart's content.
All 700?
All 700.
What was cooked for 200?
What was cooked for 200. So this is one of those...
I'm sure government would like Swami to do something like that in periods.
That's a question that a lot of people would be asking and have found answers to that also. So,
okay.
Swami's visits to our house were for occasions like this, and once he came home to attend my sister's wedding also. And that again was a nice incident. Since my parents were busy with the wedding reception, the duty of going and bringing Swami from Vrindavan to our house lay upon me and my brother. So we had taken a car and we went to Vrindavan and were waiting for Swami. And Swami sent word for us to come inside, and we went inside. We waited. And then at around... maybe by around 4:30 or 5 or maybe a little later, 6 maybe. He said, come, let's go. And then he sat in a car, and it was in which Professor Gokak also was there. And then he just told us to follow him. And the whole train of cars went into Professor Gokak's house, who was at that time the Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University. Bangalore University, at Carlton House in Bangalore. And then... We had an old car, and so we were slow and we got delayed. So when we reached the gates of Carlton House, we found that the gates were closed and we were not allowed inside. And after a few minutes, Swami sent word from inside, go and see Chandri's sons are waiting, and to bring them inside. So that's how my father was addressed by him. Chandri was what he was called. So... and of course, we also went in, and then Swami said, okay, wait. And we waited, and then everybody sat for dinner, and then we were standing around looking at what to do. Wedding reception is going on, sister's wedding reception. So Swami said, okay, you also sit and eat. Then we prayed to him, Swami, what is this? We have to take you to the reception, and you're asking us to eat food here. I said, no, we will go there later. You finish your food first. So he did come for the reception, but it was rather late in the night. It was probably around 8:30 or 9. He came and blessed my sister and brother-in-law and went.
Now I would like to ask you something about your profession. I notice you have become very actively involved in service to the community. How did that happen?
I qualified as an orthopedic surgeon from the Kasturba Medical College at Manipal. And when I started my practice in the year 1980, the private practice was nothing much to write home about. And I had a part-time job as a kind of an assistant to one senior consultant in Bangalore. So I had time on my hand, and I did not like to waste my time. And so I was always looking for an opportunity where I could do something. Maybe it was not to waste my professional skill, at the same time help people who require it. Later on, when I joined the medical college, I had the opportunity of working in a government hospital attached to our medical college, the Ramaya Medical College in Bangalore. And at that time, I had an opportunity to exploit my feeling, where I didn't have to bother to ask anybody for anything. I was my own boss. I was a one-man department. And it was a government hospital and completely free. So I utilized this opportunity to start with. So in a government hospital, like things like this are unknown, and I made a beginning, and I had a lot of resistance for it. To admit every patient that requires admission and treat him unquestioningly without any reward expected out of it. So that's where I started my first act of service, I think.
That is, you went out to help people who needed help.
Who came to the hospital. I didn't go out of my way. People, whoever came to the hospital, I thought it was my duty to help them.
They were not turned away?
No, nobody who required admission was turned away. I would fight for my rights to admit a patient and treat them. And after some time, the authorities realized that I'm not going to back out. So they didn't bother me very much. In fact, I bought my own set of instruments to help me treat these patients, which I would also use in my private practice. Because the government hospital did not provide any. At this point of time, I had a contact with the organization called Rural Development Center at Whitefield. It was being run by some retired officials, mainly Army and Air Force and all these things, who are residing at Whitefield town. And they had a project which interested me. They wanted to screen disabled children and help them by correcting their deformities and giving them calipers and things like that. So that was the next step in my activity to help this thing. That I took in a large way. I used to go there every month, screen the children, bring them to...
A couple of days a month, is it?
Once a month.
Once a month.
Because once a month we would screen almost... they would identify the disabled children from the nearby villages around Bangalore. And every month I would see maybe around 80 to 90 patients. And that was more than sufficient because a large number of them required surgical care, which would take time.
True.
So there was no point in me doing it too often. So that was my first attempt to get an attachment into the Whitefield General Hospital, Sathya Sai General Hospital, which at that point did not materialize for reasons best known to Swami. He
says there is a samayam and sandarpam.
Yes, I think that samayam
you can't come. Hanuman had to wait till Kishkinda Kanda. He didn't come before that. He must remember that.
That was in 1983.
When did you start working in the General Hospital in Whitefield?
I started working in General Hospital in 1993.
93. So it's about 10 years now.
10 years now. Yes, 10 years. 83, since I was not provided the facility at the General Hospital at Whitefield then, because they did not have a required infrastructure for orthopedic surgery. So I brought all these patients to the hospital at Malleshwaram in Bangalore, the government hospital where I was attached to. And I operated on them there. I got them fitted calipers. And the Rural Development Center played a great role in rehabilitating these disabled children. And I think that was the first major thing for me. And it gave me a lot of satisfaction.
In Whitefield, how often do you go in a month?
Regularly, at least once a week, definitely.
Once a week?
Once a week, definitely. And I spend about 8 to 9 hours on that particular
Do you do only OPD work or also you operate?
I see outpatients and I operate on the same day.
In Whitefield, roughly how many operations do you do per month?
Per month, maybe around 10 operations, approximately.
Now, I remember in Whitefield, there is, in front of the operation theatre, there's a saying written, the surgeon merely cuts, it's God who heals. I've heard Dr. Bhatt say that way many times. What I'm trying to ask you is, do you feel that way when you operate?
Actually,
or do you just do it routinely, you don't even think about it?
No, I don't think about it. I offer my prayers to the Lord, of course.
Do you do?
Yes, I do.
That's pretty rare.
That is something which I learned during my training itself. That we have a time of before the surgery, when we wash our hands, it's called as scrubbing the hands.
Yes, I know.
At that point of time, you are alone all by yourself. So I chose that time.
Wonderful. That is essentially what Krishna says. We normally chant a prayer before eating, Brahmarpanam, etc. But the whole essence of Gita is that before you do anything, you just offer it to God. Krishnarpanam, one word. I heard Swami narrate so many wonderful stories about Krishnarpanam. I am absolutely delighted that you really follow this thing, because that's one of those...
Yes, I do it as a matter of routine. I do it without fail, because I trained myself to do that, because once you go into the operation theatre, your mind is lost in your work, and you start thinking about the surgery and the procedure and all that. So you don't think about anything
You heard
else.
that story of Narada and the man, the farmer, and so on. Swami has narrated that so many times. The essence of it is pretty artificial to imagine that you are loving God just because you chant His name all the time. Go about the work of the world and think of Him when it is necessary. Do it in a very purposeful way. That's the essence of that story. And I am glad you are intuitively discovered that teaching in the Gita. Now I want to come to this extraordinary event that happened recently. I don't know where to begin. Maybe I'll let you begin.
Best way to begin is at the beginning.
Okay. I'll just mention for record something that happened in the morning. That morning we were all standing. That was the 3rd of June. 4th of June, that's right. The 2nd of June, Swami gave a discourse. That was the commencement of the academic year.
Yes.
It was Monday.
Correct.
And Sanjay Sani, the principal, prayed to Swami to come to the college. The old days he used to go there if he was in Vrindavan. And Swami said, no, I won't come there. You bring the boys here. So he gave a discourse. And on 3rd, we were told that Swami was going out on 4th to the house of the chief minister and all that. So the 4th morning, we were there for darshan. We waited, and somebody came with a message saying there won't be any darshan. Swami is occupied. Cryptic message. So then I met Narsimurti. He said, I don't think Swami is busy. I think there has been some problem. This is what he said. So we went inside the Tri building, and it was presenting a very different spectacle. The important point was we couldn't go upstairs. You remember Swami lives upstairs. This is for the benefit of the listeners. There was no way of going to Swami's room and finding out. At that point, that was not important. It was 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Nothing was happening, and all doors were barred, and it began to look pretty strange, odd, and we were getting very anxious. We were sitting there hour after hour, walking up and down sometimes, wondering, praying, and nobody had anything except a glass of water now and then. And outside world, of course, did not know anything. At about 4 o'clock, some people managed to get near Swami's room from the other side, and then they made some noises, and slowly a door was opened, and 2 or 3 people were allowed into Swami's room.
It was 4 o'clock this following evening.
That's right. So then he said, I'm okay. And they came back, and we took it for granted he was okay. And it only later on we realized his body was not okay. I have to put it in God's language. Now you can take it from there.
Actually, I was called at my home on Wednesday evening.
Yes.
Wednesday evening at around 5 o'clock.
Wednesday evening.
Yes.
Wednesday was the 4th. That's 4th, right.
Yes. Wednesday evening I was called at around 5 or so.
Yes.
Between 5 and 5:15, I think. I had just come home.
And what I told you was about 3:30 on from the same day. You are talking about what happened 1.5 hours later.
Correct. And then I was called. I was just told, please come immediately. We need you. So that's what I was told. And then subsequently I was told that I insisted on knowing so that I can come prepared if I need to do something. So therefore I was told that he has fallen down in his room. Swami has fallen down in his room. He slipped, and then he's unable to move, and he's unable to move his left lower limb, and he has excruciating pain on attempted movements. And mentally I got quite a shock at hearing this, because it invariably cautions you about a fracture of the hip when such a thing happens in any normal elderly person. And the body being human, he was also subject to the same thing. I imagined. And when I went there, we had arranged, they'd already arranged for a X-ray machine to be brought.
Mobile X-ray.
A mobile X-ray machine to be brought up, and it was taken to his room, and we had an X-ray done and had it. The worst fears came true, and he had a fracture of his hip. The neck of the femur had fractured and was displaced badly also. And that was quite a shocking thing to me actually at that point of time. But then I think at some point Bhagavan took over completely and allowed me to act like a professional without paying attention to the relationship of God to a devotee. However, I had to show him the X-ray and explain to him that the fracture was there. And then the next question, like anybody else would ask, he asked, so what's the treatment? And then I without even thinking twice, I suggested to him that it has to be operated at the earliest. And there is no other way it can get better.
At that point, were you conscious you were talking to Swami in the sort of way?
That is the reason I qualified the statement. I think this is a afterthought maybe, but some point of time...
He switched you off and made you over. A doctor talking to a patient.
That's it. And I completely forgot that relationship of a devotee to the Lord. And not at one point of time did I ever think about it for the next maybe 72 hours. It never struck me about the fact, the implications of what I had done and what I was about to do.
I want to reflect on the implications later. But I think that's a very, very profound thing that he did. Unconsciously, without you being conscious of it.
Yes.
Carry on.
I think we will deal with that part of it a little later maybe. But the physical aspect of it was that I suggested to him that it required surgery. Mm-hmm. And so my immediate task was to give him a relief of his pain, and I put him onto a traction in his own bed in the room, and then gave him a painkiller shot, and he was quite comfortable after that. And then when I spoke to him again about it, he said, you come back tomorrow morning, we will think about it.
You mentioned very casually he gave a painkiller shot. As far as I know, that is the only first shot he has ever received in this.
Probably, yes.
I don't suppose...
To my knowledge.
Yeah, it looks like that. But I suppose at that time you were a doctor. You must have...
Yes, I don't think I acted in any other way other than a doctor. And I don't think I could have done justice if I'd acted in any other way. So he had a peaceful night. The following morning when I saw him, he said he had good sleep. And then again the topic of what's the next course of action came up. And I had to stick to my original opinion and tell him that this is what is required. That he needed to have surgery done on his hip, and there is no other option. Then he asked me about the surgery, and I had to explain to him the surgery. The nature of the surgery, and that I had to remove the ball of the hip and replace it with an artificial ball. There is a prosthetic replacement of the hip. One half of the hip was being replaced. So he heard all this and then again asked, is there no other way it can be done? Then I said, no, Swami, it cannot be done any other way. Even if you stay in bed for 3 months like this, it's not going to heal, and it's not going to be good for you to stay in bed like this. We want you up and about, so therefore it has to be done. So
in all this, what was his sort of mood? That is to say, compared to other patients you have dealt with. Obviously, he knew everything, but he was going through a drama.
Even in moments, the difference between the other patients and Swami throughout this whole episode is the most remarkable thing was, it's not that he did not complain of pain. He did complain of pain occasionally. And on the day of the injury when I saw him, the following day after the injury when I saw him for the first time, I did see a lot of pain in his face when we moved him to put him into bed. But the facial expression soon after that moment of pain returned back to that everlasting smile.
Wasn't that remarkable? Normally people would be...
Yes, you would expect a person to have tears in his eyes and look morose and down. That never was there in Swami.
And also maybe
even during the worst of his pain, even during the worst of his pains, I think he always put up a big smile, and in fact he blessed people going in and out of the operation room.
Yeah, we heard about that.
So
We'll come to that.
That is, I think his...
So at what point did he agree to surgery?
A minute after I had suggested to him and explained to him, he thought about it for a minute, and then the next question he asked me is, when are you going to do it?
Oh.
So that came as a very big surprise to me, because I was primed before I entered the room. He said, listen, if you tell Swami that this requires surgery, you got to be cautious and you got to be put it very tactfully. And
you were coached, is it?
Yes, I had a lot of coaches in that. And then...
Were your coaches surprised when they heard what happened?
Absolutely. My coaches were not only surprised, that they were very pleasantly surprised and thrilled at the fact that Swami has agreed.
Were you surprised?
I was very surprised, honestly. I was very surprised that he had accepted it so easily, because I had some experience of being a doctor to him in the past for a minor ailment of his knee. And I knew his reaction to various suggestions. So I was really surprised that he accepted it at its face value immediately on my suggestion. And then the next question, as I said, is when will you do it? I said, if Swami permits, we will do it today. Then immediately it was followed by...
That was a Thursday.
That was a Thursday, the 5th of June. And it was immediately followed by what time? So there was not much choice, much time to think. The day was decided, the time was the next thing pending. And then, of course, keeping in mind the sentiments of Swami and even myself about Rahu Kalam and all that, we decided that we should operate on him in the morning itself. So since he'd had his Ganji at 6 o'clock in the evening, thinking medically, I told him I needed 6 hours before I could operate. Since she's had solid food at 6 in the morning. So the stomach should be empty at least when we take a patient to the theatre. So I told him that we could operate on him at 12 noon. And he said, okay, go and make all the arrangements and come back. So that's when the whole thing started off, and then the ball set rolling by him took such a terrific momentum that nobody knew what had happened until at 3 o'clock he was brought back after the operation.
Yes, I was there when he
during
came
this back. During this interval from around 7:30 to, and thereafter, after his agreeing, I had to go back to my coaches to tell them, look, I have won a victory. I have convinced him for surgery. And that's when everybody suggested that I think this is an opportunity to set his eye also right. And therefore it was considered appropriate to put it across to him to have his eye operated. But before that, I had to check with the ophthalmologist, saying that can he organize to do the surgery at 12? Because I had already mentioned 12 o'clock to Swami. So it had to be that within the next 4 or 5 hours, he had to get things organized to get his... I knew I could do it. That was not a problem. We do it routinely at Whitefield. So, but I was not sure about the ophthalmology. So I spoke to
Dr. Hemant
Murthy, and who was initially a little hesitant. He had a lot of hesitation to do this initially, and then subsequently looking at the fact that this may be the only opportunity that we may get to give back Swami the sight in the left eye. He also agreed, and then he said he will make the necessary arrangements.
So which was done first, the eye or the hip?
No, the hip was done first.
I see.
The onus of making Swami agree for the eye operation again fell on me. Having had one success, everybody thought it may be. Then I went in with a prayer that I hope I'm not.
You score one century.
I was worried because he may turn back and say, okay, I don't want the hip surgery also.
Yeah, with Swami these things are possible.
So,
yes, of course.
Therefore, it was a little tricky. And then I prayed to him and I said, Swami, this is what it is. Would you like to consider having your eye also operated and rectified? We can make arrangements and do it. It's a 10-minute procedure. And then of course he had his usual story of I can see everything with one eye and all that. But finally he condescended to have it done, and then that was it was a bigger victory than the hip surgery actually, because everybody was quite concerned about his eye, and though he was not concerned himself.
So when Swami went into the operation theatre, what was the scene like, what was the mood like, and how did you feel?
Swami was taken into the hospital by around 10 o'clock in the morning, and we kept him in a anteroom in the operation theatre. Before we moved him in by around 11:30 or so, we moved him into the theatre.
When he was in the anteroom, were there many people there?
Yes, I think that was a bit sad, but we couldn't help it. Lots of people were there. However much we tried to avoid, everybody's concern and love for Swami made them come. And then of course
General Mahadevan says, and devotion by first, discipline behind.
Well, when emotions are high, it's difficult to restrain people, and it gets misconstrued. And however, Swami blessed all of them. In fact, they came to pay their respects and love to Swami, and he blessed all of them, and a few doctors, senior doctors of the general hospital, the super speciality hospital, and Swami's own relatives, Sri Janki Ramaya and his family, and all of them were there. Of course, all of them were effectively kept out of the operation theatre, however much some of them desired to come inside.
How many were inside actually apart from you?
Myself, and I was assisted by one of my assistants, Dr. Harish, who was a resident in the general hospital in orthopedic department, and Dr. Savitri. And then, of course, Dr. Narayan Murthy was the anesthesiologist at that point of time. Then there were about 3 or 4 nursing aides and one more junior doctor to help the anesthesiologist. It was strictly professional. The only non-professional who was there was, I think, Satyajit.
Which Swami mentioned
in his discourse recently, and who was quite aghast at what was happening inside.
Naturally.
So the hip operation was done first.
How long did it take?
The hip operation just took about 45 minutes.
That's all?
That's about 45 minutes, yeah.
And you were completely professional at that time?
Yes, as I said, from the time I suggested to him and he agreed to it and all that, I think for the next 72 hours I was not myself.
Don't you find it amazing?
Yes, I think it is. It's something which I would like to play a rewind on, but I don't think it's possible. To see how it felt then, now it is different.
No, but, may I suggest that it was God who switched it off?
Absolutely.
So that you could do your duty properly?
Yes, absolutely.
At this point I want to just ask a couple of philosophical questions. As I understand it, there is some kind of ethics which forbids a doctor from treating members of his family and all that. Close relatives. Am I right?
I don't think there's anything. Ethics does not say anything about treating family members.
No, in the sense.
But normally it is not done.
No, the reason I give to my students is when you are attached, your judgment can get clouded.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not a question of law, but attachment can cloud your professional judgment and impair your judgment.
I would like to make this point, one more point later at a later point of time relating to something else. About clouding of the judgment.
Yeah, so, in other places it's conflict of interest and a judge cannot, try his own family members and all that. This comes up in spirituality. The reason I bring it up is we are all attached to Swami. And you are a doctor by profession, but you are a devotee of Swami.
Of course.
And therefore, it must have been very difficult under normal circumstances to suspend that attachment and start playing the role of a doctor. And I think God helped you there.
Absolutely. I think
you were destined to play that role. And
I repeat myself, I think he just took over completely.
Exactly.
And everything was done.
He entered into you, switched you off.
Him, and then, yes.
By him, for him.
Yes, exactly.
On him.
And it was all done only.
It went off smoothly?
Absolutely. We had no complications.
Anything you would like to tell about the operation, if you think it would make sense to us?
Yes, the operation was basically quite a simple operation, which is done routinely by most orthopedic surgeons. It's nothing very complicated or complex. Since the muscle mass in Swami was not very much, it was easy to access the hip joint. and the fractured head was removed and replaced with a prosthesis called...
You talked about muscle mass. It is a well-known fact that there is very little muscle mass in Swami's body, which makes me as a physicist conclude that all his weight is in bones. His bones must be very strong.
Yes. Actually, I made a mention to my assistant and Dr. Savitri in the operation theatre that when I was trimming the bones to seat the prosthesis well, and Dr. Savitri also has assisted in a lot of orthopedic surgery, and she also can make a fair judgment. She also made a note that the bones were quite tough and strong.
Swami mentioned it in this discourse, Guru Purnima discourse.
And subsequently, we mentioned to Swami also that his bones...
Obviously,
usually what happens is this is of special importance to us because in an elderly person of that age, normally, a human being, you would expect the bones to be osteoporotic.
That's what I was...
Which was not so. So it was
in fact, digressing a little bit, on one occasion, I remember Swami telling, look, this is a body. Nevertheless, it's a very special body. Not because it is Swami's body, but because it has been maintained absolutely pure. And purity confers on the body certain powers and certain capabilities. He said, look, my hair has not gone grey. You fellas have gone grey and bald. There's a competition between baldness and greyness. He was very proud of it. And he said, do you know why? This is because this is pure body. That is the reason why I asked you that question. So his bone must have been almost in a sort of...
Yes, it was almost a normal bone, I would think.
But very unusual in a person of that physical age,
yes,
right?
I would certainly say yes. Because thereafter I did 2 more of such surgeries in the similarly elderly people. And it was... the change was quite remarkable. The difference was quite remarkable.
So, immediately after this, the eye surgery was done?
Yes, soon after the hip operation, the eye surgery was done.
How was Swami when he went inside, physically, I mean?
At the point of time when we moved him out of his room on a stretcher, Swami made a statement saying that this body is yours, I am handing it over to you. You do whatever you think is necessary.
You didn't sign a receipt or something like that. Okay, now what I'm trying to say is...
From that point of time, he never said anything about the whole procedure.
Just before the anesthetic was administered...
The anesthetic was administered, he was given intravenous anesthetic to start with.
No, before that, did he say anything? Did he bless you or...
Well, we sought his blessings before we took him into the theatre.
Okay.
I had to send everybody out, and then I explained to him the operation again. And that time I sought his blessings, and he did bless me. But in the operation theatre, he never said anything. Dr. Nanamurthy explained to him that he's going to give him an injection, and then he's going to sleep afterwards. He just said, okay, do whatever you want. That's about it. That's the only thing he said. Just do what you think is necessary and whatever you want.
So after the eye operation was over and he came back, you had to sort of be with him in the post-operative recovery period.
We kept him back in the same ante-room. He was brought out of the operation theatre maybe by around 1:30 or 1:45.
That quick?
Yes. There was another small drama about this eye operation also, which is probably worth mentioning. The eye surgeon got held up in traffic in Bangalore city. I had almost finished my surgery and eye surgeon was not yet there. And so everybody was kind of panicking as to what's going to happen now. And he was sent a police escort jeep. He got stuck in a traffic jam and he couldn't get his car out. And then the police gave his car to somebody to drive, and then they brought him in the police escort jeep with a siren. And of course he reached in time, just before the hip surgery closed.
And how long did the eye surgery take?
Eye surgery, I think, just took about 15 minutes. I don't think it took longer.
And then how did you find the recovery?
Recovery was, I think, very phenomenal, because at a medical level, the pain tolerance and the disregard for pain that he has, I think he recovered very, very quickly.
Normally there would be a lot of pain, is it?
Usually there is some amount of pain. We have to use a lot of injectable painkillers at least for the first 48 hours.
Is that right?
But in him, I don't think we used injectable painkillers at all after whatever was given in the operation theatre. So we just used a very mild analgesic, oral analgesics the following day. And the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Was Swami a good patient? This is a slightly delicate question.
I think he was a marvelous patient. Because once he agreed to having something done, he literally surrendered himself to you. And then
that was a lesson?
He said yes to everything we suggested to him. But of course, he was a good patient in many ways. It's not that he said yes only, but he also made an inquiry as to the why and the how of various things. And we had to take trouble to explain to him. It was not that he just said yes to everything without bothering to know what it is.
No, he knows everything.
We had
it's
to
just to make you feel more happy, that you are...
He was a very good patient. I would
say that's a lesson to us.
Oh yes, I think so.
How to behave with a doctor.
He mentioned it in one of his discourses also thereafter, saying that this is a lesson to the entire humanity, that if a hospital was good enough for a patient, a normal, ordinary patient, I think it is good enough for me also.
In fact, I mentioned this in my class today. We were talking about the lessons learned. I said, look, this is what Dr. Sathya said on Doctor's Day. One of the remarkable things is Swami did not even go to the super specialty hospital. He went to the general hospital, where on an average day, normal day, something like 600 patients come.
900.
900. Okay, so yes. I underestimated it. That's a huge amount. And the same doctor who operates all of the patients, including so many of our students, he operated on me. No imported doctor, no going abroad, nothing. That itself is a lesson. And now, how to be an ideal patient. That's another
lesson to be learned from Swami.
You should put in how to be an ideal patient.
True. Yes, Swami was an ideal patient. There was no doubt about it. Of course, he did question us and at times gave us a little hard time, but those things are quite acceptable. Considering
that is to remind you he is Swami,
yes,
I suppose.
No, it's just to remind us that you can't take him for granted.
Okay. Do you feel that his recovery was pretty good, fast?
I think so. He recovered very well from all points of view. He walked the following day of surgery, that's on Friday, at 9 o'clock. I wanted to make him sit at 7:30 in the morning so that he can breathe a little easy and then he can feel
Thank God you wanted him to sit, because if you had wanted him to walk, he would have been running. One jump ahead of you.
He said, no, we will do it later. So at 9 o'clock, actually he sent word and then said, come, I want to sit. So when I made him sit, he was so comfortable, I couldn't help myself and said, Swami, why don't you try and stand? So he stood. He had a drain in his hip. There was a drain pipe in his hip which was kept to drain out the extra blood clot. And we held on to that in one hand and Swami stood, and then he took his first few steps and he even went to the toilet. So that was, I think, divinity taking over and ignoring the pain without paying attention to the pain. He did all those things, and in fact, on the first day,
did you ever feel that he who had the power to cure himself did not do it? Because I was told by somebody that there was a person who had a similar fracture, and he said there is no need for surgery. There was a lot of anxiety in the family, and he just said no surgery. And his father-in-law was an orthopedic surgeon. He said, I can't let my son-in-law like this. And he was cured on Vibhuti. This is what I was told.
I have no idea about that, but sorry, repeat your question again, sir.
No, what I'm trying to say is that in principle, Swami, with all the power of divinity, could have cured himself without any surgery.
Well, could have cured himself there is no doubt about that. I mean, we never ever doubted that he could cure himself.
On a matter of principle, he did not.
On a matter of principle, because this has been discussed with him in detail about other things also. For example, the minor knee ailment he had, for which he used to drag his foot and limp for the last so many months. And I had the occasion to talk to him, and when everything else had also, he'd had several forms of treatment by myself, and which didn't seem to be of any use. Out of desperation, it was suggested to him that why don't you please do something to yourself and cure yourself, because I have known you cure yourself in the past of several ailments that you have suffered from, this body has suffered from. And he very clearly put it to me, saying that I cannot use my own powers to cure myself. This is an ailment of this body because of age and other reasons. And it is not something which I have taken over from somebody.
Exactly. It's a natural process.
A natural process cannot be interfered with.
Exactly.
So it is, he also made a remark there saying that it is dangerous to interfere with nature. So that is the reason why I have to allow it to pass.
That's a very profound statement. When God in human form says it's dangerous to interfere with nature,
yes, I think,
better sit up and take notice, because we tend to do it rather rashly all the time.
I think so.
Especially with all the medical experiments on cloning and genetic engineering and all that. But that's a different story. So if you were asked to sort of, reflect, look back and say what is the most remarkable part of the experience, or what is the most memorable part of the experience, what would you say?
I think the most memorable part for me is that he allowed me to do all these things. Mm-hmm. That I was chosen, the one among millions of people who would be more than willing to do more than what I probably did. And I think that itself is the most memorable part of this, apart from the fact that I had the opportunity to experience his physical proximity for almost 40 days following the injury, because I was asked to stay back at Trey Vrindavan during his period of recovery by Swami himself, and probably he had good reason for that.
See, this calls to my mind a very profound statement that Swami made on 14th of January in the year 2001. That was the year the hospital was open. Swami came early so that he could be present on 19th January. Remember, 19th January was the inauguration of the Bangalore Super Speciality Hospital. Normally he is here on 14th for the Shankranti, because that's the day the institute prizes are given after the sports. But that day he was in Bangalore, and he inaugurated the Samskrita Sadanam. And he gave a discourse. I was there. And there was no translator.
That is in Bangalore City.
Bangalore City. And there was no translator, and he just spoke in Telugu. Beautiful. He made a couple of very important points. He said, point number one, God does not want anything for the simple reason everything is already his. But when God comes in human form, he does two things. He gives people an opportunity to give something to him. Not that he wants it, but because it will make them happy. And in some cases, he goes out of the way to some people and says, can you do this for me? Will you do this for me? Just to make them love God and come closer to him. And it would not be very surprising if in the cosmic framework, God took upon himself this injury to give the blessing of divine intimacy to a chosen few in their own respective ways. We cannot fathom why he should go through. In the normal course of events, you will say, oh, he had a fall and therefore there was this. But why should God have a fall? I can tell you, there was a period in one of the houses in which I was staying in Hyderabad, the bathroom was very slippery. And I used to tell myself, Swami, you are working overtime. I have to be breaking my head twice a day, every day. I literally used to say that. And here was the God who was protecting me every day, who has a fall. He need not. It may look very natural, it may look very ordinary, it may look routine in an elderly person. So many people fall at that age. But in the cosmic drama, it might have happened just so that some people get... I mean, for us, it's a very painful way. It need not have happened this way. You could have done it in any other way. But you cannot fathom or analyze God. In fact, Swami once said, it's a very profound statement. He said, even Balarama could not understand me. More or less saying, I was Krishna.
Yes.
Even Balarama could not understand me. It's a very profound and extraordinary statement.
I think the lesson that he has been trying to tell all of us in a couple of discourses that he has given ever since this whole incident is, number one is to try and separate out your body from yourself.
No, absolutely.
And try to...
In fact, I discussed that in my class today.
Not to suffer the pain that the body experiences. A couple of times during my discussion with him during the course of this treatment, there's a standard question that all of us ask a patient when we go to them. How are you? How is your pain? And then he always used to say, I have no pain at all.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, once I got a little perturbed and annoyed to a point, and then I told him, Swami, if you keep on telling us you have no pain, we will not come to know about what is happening inside to the wound healing and things like that. So please tell us if you have pain. Then once he made a remark saying, he said, look, I have pain, there's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't suffer the pain. I think that was a very nice statement and a profound meaning to it. He says he has pain, there's no question about it. The body experiences the pain, but I don't suffer from it. I try to detach myself.
His threshold is very high.
It is not just his threshold, he's detached himself from that body. And therefore, the entire
it's just like you don't suffer mental pain, you don't
yes,
suffer physical pain also.
You detach yourself from that sensation of pain. You will have a pain, but then your body will experience the pain because the nerve impulses have to go to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to perceive the pain. But the mind is different. You don't have to suffer the pain. You can still smile with that pain.
That only yogis can do.
That only Swami can do, I think.
Of course, obviously.
So
I mean, we have heard of Ramana and Ramakrishna had cancer, and that's a damn painful disease.
Yes.
And so obviously, when you are at the level of the divine, and Swami is divine, so he taught us a lesson, rise to that level.
Exactly. I think not to pay attention to the pain too much.
In terms of the battles of life and the struggles of life, that's what he says. You can't run away from them. They'll be there, but just let them pass. Ignore them. You keep going where you have to.
Without forgetting the goal.
Yes, that's right. So, well, Doctor, it took so much of your time, but it was really necessary on behalf of posterity and all our listeners at the present time. I think this is going to be an extraordinary document in the history of the Sathya Sai avatar in the years to come, in the decades to come, in centuries to come. People would listen to this with awe and wonder, and they would be ever thankful to you. Not that you needed this kind of an experience, not that you want to be thankful for this,
well,
but that's the way
nobody would
is.
plan this kind of an experience.
This is the way destiny
happens.
is. This is the way destiny is. You never know what you're destined for. You don't know what role God will play. And Ramakrishna is very clear about it. He says, nobody can say anything. God will do anything He wants at any time He wants. There can be absolutely no reason or rhyme. Only He knows if at all there is a reason.
Yeah, I think I have first-hand experience of that.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I enjoyed being in this studio and to share my feelings with the listeners.
Have you been interviewed before?
No, I haven't.
Well, imagine you are being interviewed for Radio Sai. That's just, straight away getting into the big league. Thank you and have a nice time back home. Sai Ram.